The morning I buried my wife, I thought grief was the hardest thing I'd face. But that very afternoon, my daughter and son-in-law dragged me to a lawyer's office demanding I sign over our $1.5 million house. They thought I was too broken to resist. What they didn't know was that Margaret left me a sealed wooden box. Inside was a secret that would burn their world down forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in the quiet of my living room, staring at the empty chair where Margaret used to sit, and all I could think about was how much I had given up for my family. Every sacrifice came rushing back like a flood. I remembered the $60,000 I spent on Linda's college tuition, semester after semester, writing checks when my own pockets were almost empty. I remembered the $25,000 I pulled from my retirement savings to buy Brian his first car, because he said it was the only way he could commute to work and support my daughter. And of course, the wedding. A ceremony that cost me nearly $40,000, money I didn't have. Money I could have used to pay off the mortgage sooner. But I wanted my little girl to have her dream day. I never complained. I never let them see the weight I was carrying. I just kept telling myself, this is what fathers do. This is what love looks like. But now, sitting in the same room where I once planned those sacrifices, I felt a sharp sting in my chest. It wasn't just disappointment. It was betrayal. The thought that after all of that, they could look me in the eye and see me, not as a father, not as a man who gave everything, but as an obstacle standing in their way, it twisted like a knife in my heart. The sacrifices were never just about money. That's what hurts the most. I can still taste the meals Margaret and I ate when we were younger, beans and rice, day after day, because every extra dollar went toward Linda's school fund. I can still feel the way we gave up trips, year after year. Margaret dreamed of visiting Paris. She used to talk about standing under the Eiffel Tower, holding hands, like in those black and white movies she loved. I always promised her, one day, but that day never came because every time we saved enough, something for the kids came first. Tuition, braces, piano lessons, sports camps. I canceled nights out with friends because we couldn't afford a babysitter. I turned down a business partnership that could have changed my future because the risk felt too high when Linda's needs were staring me in the face from every direction. Sacrifice became a way of life, and I did it gladly, or so I thought, because I believed it was building a future for my family. But now, sitting here, I see how blind I was. I see how I traded away my dreams, my comfort, my peace of mind, thinking I was investing in love, when all along I was just feeding a hunger that would never be satisfied. The house around me felt heavy with memory. The $1.5 million brick-and-mortar structure wasn't just real estate, it was my legacy. Margaret and I laid every brick of our lives into this place. We hung our wedding picture in the hallway. We marked Ethan's height on the pantry door frame. Those pencil lines are still faintly visible if you look close enough. Every corner whispered a story. The backyard where Linda learned to ride her bike. The kitchen where Margaret baked apple pies every Thanksgiving. This house was more than money. It was laughter, it was warmth, it was family. And yet, to Linda and Brian, it had become nothing but equity. A number on a piece of paper. When I looked at the photo of Margaret smiling in her wedding dress, I felt something break inside me. What once filled me with warmth now stabbed me with grief. The living room, once full of laughter, was now hollow, echoing only with silence. And the silence wasn't peaceful, it was accusing. It said, "Look what they've turned us into. Look what your love has bought you." As I tried to breathe through the weight of that silence, I began the painful process of going through Margaret's things. Her clothes still smelled faintly of lavender. Her handwriting on recipe cards still looked so alive it made my throat tighten. And that's when I found it. A wooden box, small and unassuming, was tucked at the bottom of her cedar chest. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a folder labeled Whitman Family Trust. My eyes raced across the words. Every asset, our home, our savings, even the stocks I had forgotten about, was locked inside a trust, and I was the trustee. Margaret had written her own notes in the margins. In her careful cursive, "Family legacy clause, only a child who shows true care for their own can inherit." My heart pounded. She had known. She had seen what I refused to admit about Linda's weakness and Brian's greed. The file was more than paperwork. It was Margaret's voice speaking from beyond the grave, telling me she had left me the weapon I would need, and along with the trust file was a letter, sealed with her handwriting. I couldn't bring myself to open it right then. My chest ached with the weight of it. To discover in my grief that she had been carrying this foresight alone, it was like losing her all over again. Nor kep, the pain of betrayal from the living and the sorrow of secrets carried by the dead. For hours I sat there, staring at the box, feeling the shift inside me. The man who walked into that funeral, broken and ready to surrender, was not the same man holding that file. At first I was paralyzed. Shock held me still. But slowly, grief gave way to something harder, something sharper. I began to see it for what it was, not just betrayal, but an opportunity. Margaret had armed me with the truth, with the power to protect Ethan and our legacy. I whispered into the quiet room. "You saw this coming, didn't you, Margaret? You always were the stronger one." I wiped my face and felt the heat of anger settle into resolve. They thought I was weak, but now I had proof. Proof that love wasn't just memories. Love had left me armor, and I intended to use it. I reached for my phone. Dozens of messages lit up the screen. Linda is asking for help with bills. Brian demanded just one more loan. My thumb hovered over the replies. For years I answered everyone. For years I gave, I excused, I explained. But not this time. I hit delete. One by one, every message disappeared from the screen. For the first time in my life, I chose silence. It felt like a small act, but to me it was monumental. It was the first crack in the prison I had built with my own sacrifices. I pressed the folder against my chest and whispered, "Margaret, this time I'll do it right. I'll protect Ethan. I'll protect what we built." My voice trembled, but not from fear, from conviction. The words came out like a vow, like a prayer, like a promise I should have made long ago. The room looked different after that. The same furniture, the same photographs, the same ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, but it all felt changed. The recliner where Margaret once sat was no longer a comfort, it was a reminder of absence, a reminder of the work I still had to do. The ticking clock was no longer a gentle background noise. It was a countdown, a warning that time was short. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a battlefield. Every wall, every piece of furniture seemed to ask me the same question. Will you let them take this from you, or will you fight? And deep down, I knew the answer. For Ethan, for Margaret, for the man I used to be, I would fight. And so, in that empty house, filled with ghosts of laughter and echoes of betrayal, I made a decision. I picked up the phone not to call Linda, not to answer Brian, but to dial Carla Jenkins, my lawyer. My voice was steady when she answered. I told her I had found the trust file. I told her I was ready to act. The silence of my living room was still heavy, but for the first time since the funeral, it wasn't suffocating. It was waiting. Waiting for the storm I was about to unleash. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. The morning after I found Margaret's wooden box, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The weight of betrayal still pressed against my chest. But it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. I made a pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the trust file spread in front of me, and for the first time since Margaret's funeral, my hands didn't tremble. The words on those pages no longer blurred together with tears. They stood sharp, solid, like a weapon forged for this exact moment. I picked up the phone and dialed Carla Jenkins, my attorney of 20 years. When she answered, I didn't stumble over my words like I had during those shaky calls after the funeral. My voice was steady. "Carla," I said, "I need you to freeze every asset tied to the Whitman Trust. Effective immediately." There was a pause, the sound of her pen tapping. Then her calm response. "I'll get it done, Mr. Whitman. Margaret was wise to prepare this. Let's make sure her foresight is honored." By noon, I was sitting in Carla's office, the smell of leather chairs and the faint hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. She laid the papers in front of me, crisp white sheets that carried the power of law. I took the pen, and for a moment I stared at it. Not long ago, my hands shook even while holding a cup of tea. Now they were steady as stone. Line after line I signed my name, each stroke of ink reclaiming another piece of my life. I could feel something shift inside me. Every signature was like a brick being set back in place, rebuilding the fortress they thought they had torn down. When I slid the papers back across the table, Carla smiled at me, not with pity, but with respect. "Margaret would be proud of you," she said. I swallowed hard. For a second, I thought I might break again, but instead I straightened in my chair. She left me the tools. I intend to use them. From Carla's office, I went straight to the bank. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I approached the counter. A young teller looked up, recognition in her eyes when she saw my name on the paperwork. "Mr. Whitman," she said softly, "I just want to say, your wife was a remarkable woman. She thought of everything. You're in good hands." That one line had hit me harder than anything Linda had ever said. A stranger, someone who didn't know me a thing, could show more warmth in a single sentence than my own daughter had in years. The kindness of that bank teller burned into me, not with comfort, but with resolve. How could someone outside the family see Margaret's worth so clearly, while Linda and Brian reduced her life's work to dollar signs? That moment sealed it. I wasn't just protecting assets anymore. I was protecting her memory. I whispered under my breath as I handed over the forms, "They'll never erase you, Margaret, not while I'm breathing." That evening, Linda and Brian showed up at my house uninvited, as if they still believed it was theirs to walk into. Linda's perfume filled the hallway before she even stepped into the living room. Brian carried a laptop bag, his tie loosened like he had just come from some important meeting. They spread papers across my coffee table charts, projections, glossy images of condos and beach houses. Linda's voice was dripping with excitement. "Dad, with the equity from the house and the savings accounts, Brian and I can expand. We're looking at properties in Florida. Imagine sunshine all year, no more winter blues." She laughed as if this were some family dream we all shared. Brian leaned forward, pointing at the numbers. "It's all here. Once you sign the transfer documents, you won't have to worry about anything. We'll take care of everything." I sat back in my chair, my face calm, my hands folded. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I let them talk. Let them reveal every ounce of their greed while I memorize each word. Margaret once told me, "If you let a liar talk long enough, they'll build their own gallows." That night I saw the noose tightening around their necks with every syllable. They mistook my silence for weakness. Linda reached for my hand, her voice lowering into that practiced tone she used as a teenager whenever she wanted something. "Dad, you know you can trust us. Mom would have wanted us to be comfortable." The mention of Margaret's name in her mouth made my stomach turn, but I kept my face blank. Inside, though, the fire burned hotter. They had to dig up Margaret's memory just to justify their greed. That was when I realized they were desperate, desperate enough to weaponize even her ghost. And that desperation was going to be their undoing. Later that night, long after they had left, I walked into the den to check on some papers I had tucked away. That's when I saw her, Linda, standing by my desk with the drawer open. She froze when I entered, her hand clutching the emergency envelope I had kept hidden, $10,000 in cash meant for unexpected repairs or medical bills. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look ashamed. Instead, she held it up and said coldly, "This is ours anyway. You don't need it." My chest tightened, not from fear but from rage, so deep it made my vision blur. The audacity, the sheer arrogance. Every fiber in me screamed to shout, to snatch it from her hand. But I didn't. I let the moment hang heavy in the air. Her words, her theft, her shamelessness, they had become the evidence I needed. I locked the image in my memory. When the time came, I would use it. Margaret's trust file would be the blade, but Linda's greed would sharpen it. The next morning, Carla called me back into her office. She slid another folder across the table. "I've been digging into their finances," she said, her tone calm but her eyes sharp. "You should see this." I opened the file and my jaw tightened. Over $200,000 in annual spending on an $85,000 income, a $65,000 Lexus, $25,000 spent at a country club, a luxury Caribbean vacation, first-class flights, five-star hotels, all of it funded by debt, loans, and God knows what else. Carla tapped the paper. "This isn't just irresponsible, it's fraudulent. If they've been using your name on any of this, it could be criminal." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. The picture was clear now. They weren't just greedy, they were reckless. and that recklessness was going to bury them long before they could bury me. For days, I played my part. I answered Linda's calls with a calm voice. I let Brian ramble about investment opportunities. I met them once more in my kitchen, where they brought more spreadsheets, more promises of grandeur. All the while, I stayed silent, observing, collecting, letting them believe I was too tired to resist. Inside, I was already positioning every piece on the board. Every lie they told me was another rope I would use to bind them when the time came. But I didn't stop there. One night, after Carla had left me with copies of their financial records, I sat at the old computer in the study. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard before I typed Brian's name into the public records database. The screen loaded, and what appeared made my blood run cold. Multiple lawsuits, a defaulted loan from 5 years back, and then an arrest record. Nothing major enough to make headlines, but enough to paint a clear picture. Fraud and minor embezzlement were swept under the rug with a settlement. My stomach turned. This was the man Linda had tethered her life and tried to tether mine to. The man she defended, even as he drove her into debt. I printed every page, stacked them neatly, and slipped them into Margaret's wooden box. My secret weapon had just become unstoppable. That night, as I closed the box, I whispered the words that had been forming in my chest since the day of the funeral. They think I've lost. But this game has only just begun. The air in the room seemed to shift, heavier, denser, as if even the walls were listening. The ticking of the grandfather clock echoed louder than ever, marking each second as another step closer to the inevitable confrontation. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and for the first time in weeks, I felt control settle back into my bones. Not the shaky illusion of peace I once clung to, but real control. The kind that comes from knowledge, from preparation, from knowing the storm is coming and holding the lightning in your own hands. And to those of you listening to my story right now, if you've ever seen greed tear a family apart, you know the look in their eyes. You know that coldness. If you feel that same fire in your chest, if you see the truth of what I'm saying, then type just one word in the comments: greed. Because that's what this is, and that's what will destroy them. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. Chapter 4. I chose my living room because I wanted them to see what they were trying to take. The afternoon light came through the lace curtains Margaret loved, turning the dust in the air to gold. The mantel held our wedding photo, her smile still steady, still kind. The old grandfather clock ticked like a patient witness. Carla Jenkins sat at the far end of the coffee table with a neat stack of folders and a small digital recorder. I set out 4 chairs, 1 for me, 1 for Carla, 2 for Linda and Brian, and left the rest of the room empty. No distractions, no place to hide. When the doorbell rang, the house seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Linda walked in first, chin high, carrying a slim leather folder the color of cream. Brian followed with his laptop bag and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. They looked around like buyers at an open house, not like a family returning to a home. Linda's gaze flicked to the framed photo on the mantel, paused, then moved on as if even my memories were staged. They didn't say it, but I could hear the thought running under their smiles. This will be ours soon. I offered water. They said no. Brian set his laptop on the table and began pulling out printed spreadsheets and glossy images of properties in Florida, just as he had before. Linda kept her voice sweet, but it carried the sharp edge of entitlement. Dad, we appreciate you inviting us. We've brought everything, so this can be quick and simple. You'll feel so much lighter when the paperwork's done. I took my seat and folded my hands. The calm that had carried me through the last few days settled into my bones. The fear that used to live in my chest like a trapped bird was gone. In its place was a steadiness I recognized from another life, the way I felt when I was a young man and a job needed doing, when excuses didn't matter and feelings had to wait. Carla nodded at me once, a quiet signal. She began. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice even. "Before we discuss any transfer of assets, we'll proceed in an orderly fashion. First, I'll enter the record of Mr. Whitman's capacity. Then we'll address recent activity related to the house and accounts." Brian blinked at the word record. Linda smiled as if this were a small, fussy detail she could brush aside. I let the silence stand. There was a soft knock at the open doorway. I had asked two people to join us for a few minutes, not to attack, not to embarrass anyone, but to anchor the truth in more than my voice. Mrs. Gable, my next-door neighbor for 18 years, stepped in with her tidy cardigan and the calm look of a person who has seen too much and still chooses gentleness. With her came Pastor Allen, a friend from church who had sat at my kitchen table many Sunday afternoons after Margaret got sick. They didn't sit. They stood near the doorway like clear witnesses. "Just a few statements," Carla said. She clicked her pen. Mrs. Gable spoke quietly, not looking for attention. "I've lived next door a long time. I've watched Mr. Whitman shovel my walkway when my back went out. I've watched him bring soup when I had the flu. Since Margaret passed, he's been steady. Sad, but steady. He comes and goes, pays attention to his mail, and drives without trouble. If you ask me whether he's clear-minded, I'd say yes. If you ask whether he's been pressured lately, I'd say, I've heard raised voices on his porch that weren't his." Her eyes flicked toward Linda and Brian for a heartbeat, then back to me. "That's all." Pastor Allen added his piece. "I've met with Harold weekly for months. We've prayed. We've gone through paperwork together. He reads every line, asks good questions, and takes notes. He's grieving, of course, but he's sound." He glanced at me with a small, steady smile. "He knows what he's doing." The room felt different after they spoke. Not louder, just clearer. The air didn't weigh so heavily on my chest. Carla thanked them, took their signed statements, and they slipped out as quietly as they had come. The clock resumed its patient counting. Linda laughed a little, that airy sound she uses when she's annoyed. "Dad, is all this really necessary? We're family. We could have kept this simple." Brian slid a spreadsheet forward. "Here are the timelines," he said. "We list, we close. You move into a nice senior community near the lake. We'll handle the taxes." Carla didn't look at the spreadsheets. She opened the first folder, her tone turning formal. Item 1. Confirmation that the Whitman Family Trust assets were frozen as of last week, at the request of the trustee, Mr. Whitman. All movement on the accounts now requires his signature alone. Linda's smile went still. Brian's pen stopped tapping. Carla continued as if she were reading the weather. Item 2. Written statements confirming Mr. Whitman's capacity. She set those aside. Then she opened the second folder and slid a page to the center of the table. Item 3. We will now address welfare concerns. "The welfare of who?" Linda asked, her voice sharpening. "Of Ethan," Carla said. She glanced at me. I nodded. Carla lifted a short letter on Dr. Evans's letterhead and read, "The patient exhibits signs consistent with chronic stress, including elevated cortisol levels and underweight status for age. In my professional opinion, he requires a stable and supportive environment and protection from punitive exposure to extreme temperatures." Carla's words did not shake. They did not accuse. They simply stood in the middle of the room like a post set into concrete. Linda's laugh broke a little. "You took him to a doctor without telling us? That's overstepping." Her cheeks flushed, anger rising to hide the fear underneath. Brian said nothing. His eyes were on the letter. He was trying to calculate risk. Carla placed the letter down, then lifted a page stamped with a notary seal. Item 4. A neighbor's sworn statement describing multiple occasions when the child was left outside unattended in cold weather. She didn't need to read it. The seal spoke for itself. Silence. I let it work. In that silence, I remembered the first time I saw Ethan's breath in the cold on Thanksgiving, the way his small hands shook inside my coat. The memory settled like a stone on the table next to the papers. Linda reached for indignation and came up with habit. "Dad, this is getting ridiculous. You're making us out to be monsters when we're just trying to provide a future. This is about the house. Let's stick to the house." Carla lifted the third folder, the thick one I had held, like a shield in my chest for days. "Very well," she said. "The house." Brian brightened, misreading the turn. He slid another glossy printout toward me, a photo of a beach condo with a white balcony and palm trees. "This is what I'm talking about. We can roll the equity from this house into something that works for everyone. It's time to be smart." Carla didn't glance at the photo. She reached into the folder and set a stack of statements on top of it instead. Bank records, credit cards, loan documents. $200,000 in annual spending, she said evenly. supported by $85,000 in income, a $65,000 vehicle, $25,000 to a country club, first-class airfare to the Caribbean twice, cash advances, store cards, all in the last 24 months. Each number fell into the room like a stone into a still pond, ripples spreading across the silence until there was nowhere left to look but down. Brian's mouth tightened. He reached for the bravado that had carried him this far. "We had plans," he said. "We know how to leverage assets. Debt is a tool." "Debt can be a tool," Carla agreed. "Fraud is not." She turned one page. "On this card, an authorized user was added without Mr. Whitman's consent. The signature does not match his. We will be sending these records to the bank's fraud department after today." It was Linda who snapped first. "So what?" she said, then heard herself and softened the words without softening the meaning. "I mean, Dad would have agreed. He always pays. He knows what we need. We're family." Family. She said it like a trump card, like a key that opens any door. I watched the world fall to the floor between us. It didn't shine. It didn't move. It lay there like a used napkin. Carla rested her fingertips on the next file. "We can continue with numbers," she said, "or we can move to recordings." Her voice was almost gentle. She pressed a button on the small device by her elbow. A hum, a click, and then Brian's voice filled my living room, unmistakable and careless, lifted from the sidewalk where I had stood half-hidden behind the juniper bushes the day I came home early. "We need it listed quietly," his voice said on the recording. Smooth with the confidence of a man who believes he can bend rules to his will. 1.6 million. No noise, no drama. "He's not moving fast enough, so we move for him. Don't tell him yet. We'll bring him papers when it's already cooking." Linda's face drained of color so fast I thought she might faint. Brian didn't look at her. He stared at the recorder like he could will it quiet. He couldn't. The device kept playing his own words back to him. Then another clip. His whisper was harsher this time. "The house is our equity. Once we pull it out, we're free." Silence swept the room like a wind through dry grass. There was nothing to say that would make those words smaller. They had weight, they had edges, they cut. Linda clung to the last thread. "This is entrapment," she said, even though it wasn't. "This is manipulation." The edges of her voice frayed. She turned to Brian. "You told me he signed. You told me this was handled." Brian finally looked at her, anger flashing like a match in gasoline. "I told you we needed him to sign. I told you I had a plan until he froze the accounts. You were the one who—" He cut himself off, but the damage was done. The "we" had cracked. What was hidden in the dark had started to fight in the light. They spiraled, fast. Linda reached for another defense, another diversion, another story that would make the present disappear into the past. She pulled a folded letter from her folder and waved it like a flag. "Mom wrote this years ago, Dad," she said. "She wanted me to be comfortable. She said, 'Take care of yourself.' She would have wanted you to sign. I recognized the paper." It was a note Margaret had written to Linda when Linda had postpartum blues, a gentle, simple encouragement. Linda had saved it. I had been proud of her for keeping her mother's words. Seeing it twisted now, my throat went tight. "They have to dig up the past." I heard my own voice in my head, steady and tired, just to find a reason for their hunger. I didn't speak the words out loud. I didn't need to. Carla had already opened the final folder. "This is the only letter that matters today," Carla said, and lifted the sealed envelope I had found in the wooden box. My name was written in Margaret's careful hand. I had opened it the night before, alone at this same table, and read it twice, and then a third time while the clock counted my heartbeats back to calm. Now Carla unfolded it and read for all of us. "My love," she began, "if you are reading this, I am gone, and you are carrying a weight I prayed you would never have to carry. You have always believed the best in our child. So have I. But I am asking you to believe what is true, not what is comfortable." Linda flinched as if struck. Brian's jaw set. Carla continued, her voice steady and low, letting each sentence come to rest before moving to the next. "The Whitman Family Trust exists for one reason, to protect our legacy for those who live with compassion and integrity. If our child shows that strength, if she protects her own child, if she treats you with care, then let the trust flow to her. Suppose she cannot. Then protect Ethan instead. Do not let guilt guide you. Let love guide you. Real love is not a rug to be walked on. It is a wall that holds the roof up. Be that wall if you must. No speech from me could have cut as cleanly as Margaret's plain words. They weren't angry, they weren't cruel, they were weight-bearing. I could feel them settle into the house, into the bones of the walls, into the floor under my feet. Linda covered her mouth with her hand. Brian looked at the photo on the mantel for the first time since he had entered, then looked away as if it burned. Carla placed the letter down beside the trust document. Per the family legacy clause, and per the trustee's findings, the beneficiary status of Miss Linda Whitman is suspended. Effective immediately, all assets in the Whitman Family Trust are directed to the Ethan Whitman Trust to be managed by Mr. Whitman as trustee until Ethan reaches an age specified by the instrument. Her voice did not rise. She did not gloat. She simply read the law as it was written, the way a judge might read a verdict. Linda's chair scraped the hardwood. She stood, then sat again because her legs didn't trust her. "You can't do this," she said. But it came out thin. "You can't just—" Brian cut her off, anger now curling into panic. "You told me your mother loved me," he whispered to her, forgetting we were in the room. "You told me she would have wanted." "She did love you," Linda shot back, tears finally spilling. "You said you had it handled. You said the realtor was discreet. You told me he would sign." "I would have," I said, and my own voice surprised me with how calm it sounded. "If this had been about care, if this had been about family." I let the words land one at a time. "It wasn't." Brian's temper snapped. "You're ruining our lives over technicalities," he spat, but even as he said it, he heard the smallness of it. He heard the lie. "Not technicalities," Carla said. "Choices." I reached for the folder that held the simplest proof of those choices. The $10,000 envelope, a photo I had taken of it in Linda's hand at midnight, her rings gleaming in the lamplight, the drawer still open behind her. I slid the print across the table. "This was for emergencies," I said quietly. "For sickness. For broken furnaces in winter. For life." I looked at Linda, not to shame her, but to hold her with the truth. "You told me it was yours. You looked me in the eye and you told me that." She crumpled a little. For a heartbeat, I saw my little girl under the woman she had become. Then she reached for anger again, like a coat thrown over a nightgown, thin and not very warm. "We needed it," she murmured. "We always need it." Yes, that was the center of it. The need that never ends. The hole that no money fills. Carla stacked the documents, one neat pile, the way a surgeon might set aside instruments after closing a wound. "Final item," she said. "Notice to vacate." She passed a letter across the table, the language formal and clean. 30 days from today, the property will be prepared for sale. The proceeds will fund the miners' trust. No distribution is authorized to Miss Whitman or Mr. Collins. Any attempt to encumber the property will be referred to law enforcement and the court. Linda stared at the letter as if it were written in another language. Brian's face hardened into something I had always feared I might see, and now finally recognized. A man who had lost his bet and blamed the dealer. He stood as if to loom, but the house itself refused to let the gesture land. This room had seen sorrow and joy, birth announcements and hospice whispers. It would not be bullied by a raised voice. So I stood too, not to counter him, but to end it. I looked at both of them. I let the weight of my years and my work and my love stand with me. Then I said the only words left. "You have 30 days to leave," I told them. Steady, not unkind, simply final. "The house will be sold. Every dollar will go to Ethan's future. You will not receive a single dime." Saying it did not bring me pleasure. It brought me something cleaner, like a fever breaking, like the first clear breath after a storm. Linda's face crumpled into anger, then grief, then a blankness that frightened me. Brian muttered something about lawyers and appeals. Carla gave him the polite, empty nod attorneys use when people in free fall grab at air. I walked them to the door. No shouting, no dramatic exits, just the creak of old hinges and the cool breath of late afternoon air. On the porch, Linda turned as if to say something tender, but she didn't have any tenderness left. She stepped off the porch without meeting my eyes. Brian followed, walking too fast, like a man chasing a bus he had already missed. Their car door slammed. The engine turned over. The street fell quiet again. Inside, the living room seemed larger, not because the furniture had moved, but because the weight had. Carla began to gather the documents. She set the sealed envelope from Margaret on top, then paused, pressing her palm flat against it for a beat like a thanks. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I know what to do now." My voice surprised me again with its steadiness. "File the fraud claim, schedule the sale, send copies of everything to the bank." She nodded, gave my shoulder a firm, human touch, and left me in the house Margaret and I built. I stood at the window for a long while and watched the light shift across the lawn where I once taught Linda to throw a softball. The grass had come in thin this year. I'd reseed it when the weather turned. Work steadies the hands. The hands that had shaken in grief now felt ready. Ready for paperwork, ready for carries and boxes. Ready for the slow, honest labor of closing a chapter with dignity. That night, the house did not feel haunted. It felt held. The grandfather clock ticked the same way it had ticked for 40 years, but the sound was no longer a countdown to dread. It was a metronome for the work ahead. I made tea and carried it to Margaret's chair. I sat in it for the first time since she left. The cushion gave under my weight the way it had under hers warmth remembered. I pictured Ethan sleeping with both arms above his head like he does when he's had a good day. I pictured him older, taller, smiling with the kind of ease that comes from safety, not from things. The sale of this house, the accounts, and the trust money would help, yes. But what we had won today was larger. It was the right to build something on firm ground. There are people who will say I was hard. There are people who will say I should have forgiven more, argued less, let the past be the past. Those people did not find a trembling child on a frozen step. Those people did not hear their son-in-law whisper that the house was our equity. Those people did not read a letter from a wife who saw clearly enough to build a wall of love sturdy enough to withstand a hurricane of need. Forgiveness is holy, but boundaries are holy too. Today, we drew a boundary in ink that would not smudge. I slept deeply for the first time since the funeral. When morning came, I woke before the alarm and walked the rooms in the early blue light. In the kitchen, I cleaned the coffee maker and set it to brew. In the study, I opened the laptop and answered Carla's email with a simple approved. In the hallway, I stopped in front of the pantry and laid my hand over the faint pencil marks of Ethan's height. I whispered, "We're going to add more lines, kiddo." The house answered with silence, the good kind. By noon, Carla had sent me the scheduling documents for the sale and a note that the bank had accepted the fraud claim for review. She also sent one last attachment, public record confirmations of Brian's prior civil trouble. I filed them away, not to gloat, but to close a circle. We would not need to say those words in court if it could be helped. I did not want to salt the earth. I only wanted the weeds pulled. Later that afternoon, I got a text from Mrs. Gable. "If you need help with anything, I bake on Thursdays. I can bring a pie." It made me smile. Kindness lands differently after a fight. It's not just sweet, it's sane. I wrote back, "Thank you," and meant it with my whole heart. In the evening, when the light turned amber, Linda came by alone. She stood on the porch with her hands jammed into her coat pockets like a teenager again. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Boundaries begin at the threshold. She asked if we could revisit the timeline. She asked if we could consider alternatives. She cried a little, then stopped when she realized tears were no longer a lever that moved me. When she finally said, "I need you," I answered simply, "I need you to be better." It wasn't a sentence I took pleasure in saying. It was the truth, said with the softness I could still afford. She nodded and left. I watched her go with a feeling I can only describe as grief's twin sorrow standing alongside relief, both holding the door while love keeps watch. If you're hearing me now, and if you've ever been dismissed by your own blood, you know that hurt. You know how small it tries to make you feel. You know the way the word family can be used like a rope instead of a hand. Feeling unseen is hard, isn't it? If you believe every parent deserves respect, type one word for me in the comments: respect. Now watch what they do next and how we turn this pain into something worthy. When I finally turned off the lights that night, the house did not feel like a battleground anymore. It felt like a place where the truth had been spoken out loud, in daylight, with witnesses. That matters. The law had done its work. But more than that, love had done its work, the way Margaret promised it could when she wrote, "Be the wall if you must." Tomorrow would bring logistics, appraisers, and contractors. There would be boxes to pack, photographs to wrap in tissue, the soft ache of sorting a life into what goes and what stays. I would do it slowly, carefully, with the same hands that held my daughter when she was first laid in my arms, with the same hands that steadied a bicycle seat and later steadied a pen over legal papers, with the same hands that, for the first time in a long time, no longer shook. In 30 days, the house would belong to another family. They would run water in the bathrooms, set chairs in the dining room, and hang their own pictures on the walls. They would not know our stories, not all of them. That's all right. The best parts will travel with us inside Ethan's smile, inside the habits of care we teach him, inside the quiet decency that Margaret stitched into the fabric of our days. Money will fund his schooling, his first apartment, and the little risks you want a young man to be able to take without fear. But the real inheritance will be something he can't deposit. He'll feel it when a stranger at a bank counter treats him kindly and he recognizes it. He'll feel it when a neighbor needs a walk shoveled, and he doesn't even think to say no. He'll feel it when life asks him to choose between hunger and enough, and he chooses enough even if no one is watching. I locked the front door and laid my palm flat against the wood the way Carla had laid her hand on Margaret's letter. A small thank you. A small goodbye. I whispered into the quiet hall. We did right. The house did not answer. It didn't need to. The clock in the corner kept time, faithful as ever. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper. Justice had no trumpet in it. It sounded like a steady breath. Tomorrow, we will begin Chapter 5. Tonight, I allowed myself one small luxury that Margaret and I had postponed 1,000 times. I took her journal back to the chair and read the page where she described the first time we walked through this place, still half studs and raw wiring. "You said it would be a good house," she wrote. "I said it could be a good home. We were both right. We still are. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me." The house is gone now. The "For Sale" sign that once sat crooked on the front lawn has been hauled away, the grass already rising where the post had pierced the soil. The paperwork was signed. The keys passed across a polished oak desk at the title office, and a check in the amount of $1.5 million was deposited directly into the Ethan Whitman Trust. The bank teller shook my hand as though I'd just closed a business deal, but I knew what it really was. The conclusion of a battle that had nearly broken me. The sealing of a wound that had bled for months. Linda and Brian did not attend the closing. Carla, my attorney, told me they had already left the state, perhaps to avoid the whispers, perhaps to outrun the creditors who would surely come knocking. It doesn't matter where they went. For the first time in years, their absence does not feel like a loss. It feels like air returning to my lungs. I signed the last page with a steady hand. It struck me how symbolic that was. Only weeks earlier, my fingers had trembled so badly that even a grocery list came out like a child's scrawl. Now, with every stroke of the pen, I was affirming not just Ethan's future, but my own return to solid ground. Our new apartment is nothing like the old house. It sits 3 stories up in a red brick building that looks out over a public park. From the living room window, I can watch children running after soccer balls, their laughter carrying up like birdsong. Our unit cost $200,000, a modest space compared to the sprawling rooms of the house, but it holds something the old place hadn't for a long-time peace. The kitchen is small, just enough for me to brew coffee while Ethan eats cereal at the table. His laughter bounces off the walls like it used to when he was younger, back before the tension in the old house silenced everything. Every morning now has a rhythm. We rise early, open the blinds to let in the sun, and sit at the table with his math workbook spread between us. His tongue sticks out when he concentrates, a habit that Margaret used to tease him about, and when he finally solves a problem, his whole face lights up. "I did it, Grandpa," he cheers, and I answer the way I always do. "Yes, you did, and you'll do so much more." Afternoons are spent in the park where he plays with other children, his cheeks red with exertion, his voice unburdened. No one is whispering about houses or money. No one is plotting. just a boy living in the freedom he deserves. As for me, I have rediscovered small joys I once pushed aside. I tend to a few tomato plants on the balcony, their vines curling around the railing. On Saturdays, I join a group of men at the community center for a chess club. We laugh more than we play, but the camaraderie fills the space that Betrayal had once hollowed out. Misses. Gable from next door still brings over pies, and now I have the chance to share them with people who appreciate kindness for what it is, not for what it can purchase. Part of the trust earnings I've set aside for something Margaret would have smiled at. We established a small scholarship fund, modest at first $10,000 a year for children who, like Ethan, were left vulnerable by the negligence of those who should have protected them. The first recipient, a quiet boy with big eyes and a love of science, wrote me a letter. He said, "Thank you for believing I can be something." I folded that letter and placed it in the same wooden box where Margaret had once hidden the truth. That box now holds not just revelations, but seeds for the future. Linda and Brian's story, meanwhile, has taken a different turn. I heard from Carla that they are renting a small apartment in another state, nothing more than 2 rooms above a laundromat. The Lexus is gone. The country club revoked its membership. Brian's name came up in a local newspaper tied to debts he couldn't pay. Linda, I'm told, works part-time at a boutique, a far cry from the lifestyle she once demanded. They are living, but not thriving. And more than that, they are alone. The friends who once laughed with them at fancy dinners no longer call. The hollow of greed is not easily filled. One evening, an envelope arrived in the mail. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable Linda's. For a moment, I simply held it, the way a man might hold a live coal, knowing it could burn but unable to resist the heat. Inside was a single page. "Dad," it read, "I'm sorry. I didn't see what I was doing until it was too late. If there's a chance, please write back." I folded the letter and placed it in the same box as Margaret's words, but not beside them. Margaret's letter was a foundation stone. Linda was ash. I chose not to reply. Because forgiveness, I've learned, is not about granting someone else peace. It's about refusing to let their chaos rule your life any longer. I whispered, "I don't need your apology. I have my life now." In the quiet that followed, I thought of Margaret. I thought of her last words in that hidden letter. Real love is not a rug to be walked on. It is a wall that holds the roof up. For so long, I had mistaken sacrifice for love. I had thought giving endlessly, even to those who would consume without gratitude, was proof of devotion. But now I see the truth. Love requires boundaries. Respect requires firmness. There are lessons here, not just for me, but for anyone listening. For parents, the lesson is this: love your children, but love them wisely. Provide, yes. Support, yes. But do not confuse buying affection with building character. Set boundaries, because boundaries teach respect. For children, the lesson is sharper. Gratitude is not optional. When you let greed replace love, you may gain possessions for a moment, but you will lose the very people who gave you life. And for all of us, in this modern world where money often masquerades as worth, the final lesson is that character is the one asset no one can steal, and the one that defines us in the end. Sometimes at night I walk the park's path while Ethan plays on the swings. Last week, a small girl I didn't know ran past me, then doubled back and handed me a dandelion she had picked. "For you," she said, before running off to join her friends. Such a tiny act, almost nothing. But I stood there holding that fragile stem like it was proof that kindness still grows wild in this world, unplanted, unpurchased, freely given. Margaret would have smiled at that. She always believed the world was better than its worst moments. And maybe she was right. Because here I am, after betrayal, after loss, after battles in courtrooms and kitchens, sitting in a small apartment with a boy who believes he can do anything, and a heart that no longer trembles with dread. Every morning when Ethan looks up from his math problems and shouts, "I got it!" I feel something rise in me that no fortune could buy. I whisper back to the empty space where Margaret should be, "We did it! We kept the real inheritance safe." And I know that she hears, in whatever way the departed can hear, because the peace that fills the room feels like her answer. So I sit here tonight, pen in hand, recording these final words, not out of anger, but out of gratitude. I survived. I learned. And most of all, I am free. If you're listening now, I want to ask you something. What lesson from this journey speaks to you the most? Was it the call for parents to love with boundaries, the warning for children to hold gratitude close, or the reminder that character, not money, is the true inheritance? Please type your answer in the comments. I want to read every word because your reflections are proof that these lessons don't end with me. They continue with you. Tomorrow, I'll take Ethan to the community center. We've signed up to help pack food boxes for families in need. It's not charity in the old sense, it's participation in a circle of giving that Margaret would have loved. And in that simple act, our story continues, not in betrayal, but in renewal. The betrayal is behind us. The house is gone. The money is secured for Ethan. Linda and Brian are ghosts in another state. And I, Harold Whitman, sit in a small apartment overlooking a park, whispering into the quiet, I finally found where I belong. Every day now is proof that I chose correctly. What lesson from this story do you want to carry into your own life? Comment on the one that speaks to you most. I'll be reading every single one. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.